Hello Cloud Pedagogians, welcome to the lab Create and Assume Roles in IAM. In this, we discover how security policies affect IAM users and groups, and we go further by implementing our own policies while also learning what a role is, how to create a role, and how to assume a role as a different user. By the end of this lab, you will understand IAM policies and roles and how assuming roles can assist in restricting users to specific AWS resources. So let's understand with a scenario. Imagine that you are working for a software company. You have two developers who will be working on logs and customer data currently stored in development. The developer known as CP User 1 is a senior member of the team and requires access to these buckets on a frequent basis as she is the main developer for the project. The other developer known as CP User 2 works for different project and only requires temporary and frequent access to the buckets to view the logs. But they both should be restricted for production buckets since they are developers. So let's see how we can achieve this by starting with our task. But before starting with our task, let's see what are the prerequisites required for this lab. There should be 4 buckets that are created in S3, 2 for production and 2 for development. The buckets are CP Dev Logs, CP Production Logs, CP Dev Customer Data and CP Prod Customer Data. Also, there are 2 users that are already created, CP User 1, CP User 2 with no permissions. So now we can start with our task. In task 1, check the environment which we have already with the buckets and users. In task 2, we are going to create the policy and attach the user. In task 3, create the IAM role and attach the user to the role. In the task 4, test IAM policy and role configuration which we have created in the before task. So let's start with task 1, check the environment. Let's first check our current environment and see our buckets that are configured. Let's go up to the search bar and type in S3. Click on S3. As you can see, under the S3 buckets, we have 4 buckets being provisioned for us. 2 of them have the customer data and 2 of them have log data for production and development environment. You will be restricting access in the production buckets because they are the ones we are particularly not easily access to the developers. These would be the ones that would be restricted access to. So let's now go and see which users have been created for us. Right up at the top under the search bar, type in IAM for Identity and Access Management. Click on IAM and select Open Link in New tab. Once the IAM console is open, on the left hand side, select Users. You can see there are 2 for our lab, CP User 1 and CP User 2. And as per our objectives, 1 we will be creating the IAM policy and attaching this directly to CP User 1. Number 2, CP User, we will be creating an IAM role, linking it to the policy and then allowing CP User 2 the rights to assume that role. Good job. Now we know everything is in place. Let's go and get started with our next task, which is create the policy and attach the user. In the left navigation menu under Access Management, click Policies. Click on Create Policy. Under Select a Service, click S3. Under Actions Allowed, select all S3 actions. And under Resources, the only thing we need to worry about here is the resources for bucket. So for everything else, select the checkbox which says any in this account. Now for the bucket resource, what we need to do is get the bucket names from the S3 console which we need to configure access to. So up to the S3 management console, click on the development log bucket. Copy the name of the bucket. Under the IAM policies tab, go down to the bucket section and then click on add ARN link. Paste your bucket name here so that the ARN comes automatically in the below section. Click on add ARNs. Repeat the same process for the other development bucket. Now both of our buckets have been added into the policy. Now click on Next. On the Review and Create page next to the policy name, enter CP Prod Restricted Policy and click Create Policy. Once the policy has been created, click Review Policy and review the configuration. Before we do anything else, let's attach this to our CP user 1. So click the Entities Attach tab here. Under Attached as a Permission Policy, click Attach. Select the checkbox next to CP user 1. Click Attach Policy. Now CP user 1 has been directly attached to the IAM policy we just created. Good job, you have successfully created the policy and attached that to CP user 1. In the next task, we are going to create an IAM role and attach to the CP user 2. So let's now continue and configure our role. Click on Roles in the left navigation menu and then click Create Role. Under Trusted Entity Type, select AWS account. Under an AWS account, select this account. Copy the account ID in parentheses and paste it to some text file as you will need it later. Click Next. Select the checkbox next to CP Prod Restricted Policy and then click Next. In the role name, enter CP Prod Restricted Role. You should see that the trusted entity is your account number. This means that anything that is in this account can assume this role. Click on Create Role. Now ensure that CP user 2 can assume the role. Click Users in the left navigation menu and then click CP user 2. Under Summary, copy the ARN. Now go back and click Roles in the left navigation menu. In the Roles search bar, select the CP Prod Restricted Role. Inside, click the Trust Relationship tab. Next, we need to edit the trust policy. Click Edit Trust Policy. Delete the ARN and paste the ARN that you previously copied for CP user 2. Make sure to leave the quotation marks here. Now CP user 2 has the ability to assume the role which has the policy linked to it and thereby gaining access to S3 buckets. Good job! You have successfully created a role and attached that role to user. In the final task, we are going to test our configurations of policies and roles. Navigate to the upper right corner and copy the account ID to your clipboard. Now click on Sign Out. Click Log Back In. For account ID, paste in the account ID you previously copied. For IAM username, enter CP user 1. For password, enter the password for CP user 1. Once signed in, navigate to S3 and click on one of the prod buckets. You should see that you don't have access to this bucket. Now navigate to one of the dev buckets and you should have access for this. Let's log out here and check to see what happens now if we try this again with CP user 2. So although CP user 2 has permission to access S3 role, we don't have permissions to look at that buckets. And the reason for this is the fact that although we have permissions to assume the S3 role, this is not done by default. Whereas an IAM policy, you automatically have the right. In S3 role, you actually need to do an extra step and assume the role to get the permissions that are linked. Navigate to the upper right corner and copy the account ID to your clipboard. And then here click Switch Role. For account, paste in the account ID you previously copied. For the role, enter CP prod restricted role. Make sure it's spelled correctly and then click switch role. In the S3 console, you should now be able to see the CP dev logs and CP dev customer data buckets are accessible. Click on one of the prod buckets and you should see an insufficient permissions message. Now I know that I have permissions because of assumed role. But how do I know I have assumed a role? Well, the way you tell is at the top right hand corner of the console. Here we have the role that I have assumed and the account I have assumed it in. But what happens if I want to go back to how I was before? Once if I don't need those permissions anymore, well, if you click on the down arrow at the top right corner, and then there is an option here which allows you to switch back. And it's as simple as that. I will switch the role back. And now I don't have any permissions to see any of the S3 buckets. Congratulations, you have successfully completed this lab by creating and assume roles in AWS. I hope you have enjoyed this lab and I look forward to seeing you again in my future labs. Until then, take care and have fun with learning.